October 1st, 2013, a public library in San Francisco. A 29-year-old man sits hunched over a laptop, blind to the people quietly positioning around him. For nearly 3 years, he has run a billion-dollar criminal empire from the shadows. Online, he's known only as Dread Pirate Roberts, the kingpin of a hidden marketplace called Silk Road. In here, he looks like just another patron. Suddenly, a shout rings out behind him. The man instinctively turns his head. In that split second, undercover agents lunge at his laptop and grab it before the screen can lock. Chaos erupts in the reading room. FBI agents swarm, pinning the stunned young man to his chair. At last, they have their prize, the alleged mastermind of the dark web's first empire, caught red-handed. But how did the man behind Silk Road get here? And would this dramatic arrest truly be the end of the Silk Road? It all started with an ideal. In 2010, Ross Ulbricht was a 26-year-old physics grad and self-taught programmer, nursing radical libertarian beliefs. He dreamed of a world free from the state's rules, a place where free markets could flourish beyond any government's reach. To Ross, laws against drugs and personal choices were unjust intrusions. Why shouldn't consenting adults trade whatever they wanted, as long as no one is directly harmed? This idealism wasn't just talk. Ross was determined to put it into action. By late 2010, Ross had built the backbone of his black market, a website only accessible through the anonymizing Tor network, where all payments use the new cryptocurrency Bitcoin. This combination promised near-total anonymity. In January 2011, Silk Road quietly went live. At first, it had no users, so Ross himself listed the very first product, a batch of homegrown magic mushrooms. Slowly, curious buyers found their way to the site. The first few sales felt like proof of concept. His wild idea was working. Word spread in whispers on forums and chat rooms frequented by libertarians, tech enthusiasts, and adventurous drug users. To access Silk Road, you needed to know exactly where to look, a special Point Onion address on Tor, and have some Bitcoin handy. But those who made it in discovered a rebellious paradise. Listings for cannabis, LSD, MDMA, and more, all just a few clicks away. The site looked like a normal marketplace with seller profiles, product reviews, and an escrow payment system, except everything was anonymous and illegal. Ross, operating under the alias Dread Pirate Roberts, a deliberate nod to a fictional pirate who passed his title to a successor, oversaw it all from behind his keyboard. The implication was clear. Silk Road wasn't just one man. If one Dread Pirate Roberts fell, another could rise in his place. In those early months, as transactions grew from a handful to hundreds, Ross realized he might have truly started something revolutionary. He privately wrote of prosperity and power beyond what I have ever experienced before, and imagined Silk Road becoming a phenomenon one day. The site was still small, but growing steadily. Still, Ross remained cautious. He was just one person secretly running a global narcotics bazaar from a laptop. How long could something like that really stay hidden? For a while it did. By mid-2011, thousands of drug deals had been brokered on Silk Road, all under the radar. The users formed a loyal community. To them, Dread Pirate Roberts wasn't a criminal at all, but a visionary providing a safe space to get drugs without street violence. But the growing success carried a dark side: attention. That summer, a single news story changed everything. In June 2011, an irresistibly sensational article about Silk Road hit Gawker, a popular news site. It was titled, "The Underground Website Where You Can Buy Any Drug Imaginable." Suddenly, Silk Road wasn't just an obscure secret of the internet underground, it was front-page intrigue. Millions of readers learned that such a place existed. Traffic to the site exploded overnight. So did the scrutiny. Among those now keenly aware of Silk Road were powerful figures in Washington, D.C., and law enforcement agencies worldwide. The whole world just found out Silk Road exists. And now the question isn't if they'll find its creator, it's when. The Gawker article lit the fuse. Publicly, politicians were outraged. Privately, thousands of new users poured onto Silk Road. Within weeks of the publicity, the site's volume skyrocketed. What had been a modest illicit market suddenly became a multi-million-dollar enterprise. By late 2011, Silk Road had tens of thousands of customers and more than $1 million in weekly sales. A digital drug gold rush was underway. And at the center of it, relishing his growing influence, was Dread Pirate Roberts. On the Silk Road forums, DPR was not just an admin, but a philosopher king. He posted manifestos about freedom, privacy, and the right to self-medicate. Users hailed him as an almost Robin Hood-like figure, stealing power from governments and giving it back to the people, albeit in the form of cheap LSD and high-grade heroin. With each passing month, the legend of DPR grew. Was he a single genius or several people sharing the handle? Rumors swirled, adding to the mystique. DPR encouraged that aura of invincibility. "I'm not the first Dread Pirate Roberts, nor will I be the last," he hinted, playfully invoking the Princess Bride. The message was clear. Even if you caught one of him, the idea of Silk Road would survive. Meanwhile, Ross Ulbricht struggled to keep his two worlds separate. Offline, he was a soft-spoken, unassuming young man who moved apartments frequently and tried not to draw attention. Online, he was the kingpin of the largest narcotics network on the planet. Every day, he managed a pipeline of illegal commerce that spanned the globe. Cocaine from South America, opiates from Asia, ecstasy from Europe, all flowing through his servers to buyers everywhere, paid in Bitcoin and mailed in inconspicuous packages. Silk Road's listings swelled into the tens of thousands, offering not only drugs but also fake IDs, digital hacking tools, and other illicit goods. Almost anything was available, aside from a few things Ross refused on moral grounds, like child exploitation or hitman services. Silk Road might have had some ethical guardrails in theory, but in practice it was flooded with cash and contraband. The money was like nothing Ross had ever seen. With every sale, Silk Road took a cut of a few percent, and those bitcoins piled up fast. His commission fees alone made him a millionaire on paper. Ross had never been in it purely for the money, at least at first, but the staggering wealth accumulating under his control was impossible to ignore. He now oversaw an empire, and empires demand a ruler's attention. Success also brought stress. The more Silk Road grew, the more danger shadowed its every move. Hackers tried to attack the site, scammers prowled the forums, and of course, governments were actively trying to infiltrate and expose the operation. Ross even moved overseas for a while to stay ahead of any surveillance. He doubled down on security, cloaking servers and encrypting communications with his small staff. Yet despite all precautions, Ross was only human, and he was about to make a critical mistake. Unbeknownst to Ross, investigators were piecing together a puzzle that pointed straight at him. Early on, back when Silk Road was just getting started, DPR had posted a few ads on other websites to attract users. Casual, anonymous messages like, "Hey, check out this new hidden marketplace, Silk Road." In one such post, the poster had carelessly left an email address, russulbricht@gmail.com. It was a tiny slip, quickly deleted, but enough for a determined IRS investigator to dig up in 2013. Suddenly, the mysterious kingpin had a real name. Ross's quiet life in San Francisco no longer looked so ordinary to law enforcement. By mid-2013, Ross Ulbricht was firmly in the crosshairs of multiple agencies. A covert Homeland Security team in Chicago had infiltrated Silk Road undercover and identified an administrator account. The FBI had somehow located the Silk Road server in Iceland and quietly copied its data, pulling back the curtain on the marketplace's inner workings. The DEA and Secret Service were running their own sting out of Baltimore. Around the world, dozens of agents were on the case, silently watching and gathering evidence. Ross still logged in daily as DPR, giving orders, still managing an empire. But now the FBI was watching every keystroke, so the only question left was when to strike. The noose was tightening, but it wasn't just coming from the outside. Silk Road had its own internal cracks forming. In early 2013, one of DPR's trusted lieutenants, a site moderator named Curtis Green, was arrested at his home in Utah. He knew enough about Silk Road's operations to be dangerous if he talked. Ross's worst fear was that an insider might give him up, and now Green was in custody. Then came a sudden catastrophe. Not long after Green's arrest, someone stole a large stash of bitcoins from Silk Road's escrow accounts. DPR was furious and paranoid. He became convinced this was an inside job, perhaps the work of Curtis Green cooperating with the police or another traitor in his midst. Ross decided to send a bloody message. In a move that crossed every moral line he once held, Ross transformed into a true kingpin. He ordered a hit. Through Silk Road's encrypted chat, DPR reached out to someone he believed was a high-ranking drug cartel assassin. He offered $80,000 to have Curtis Green killed and even provided gruesome instructions to make it look like an accident. This was the unthinkable, the libertarian idealist willing to commit murder to protect his creation. The irony? The supposed hitman was actually an undercover DEA agent who had been involved in Green's bust. The agent played along, even staging a fake death scene with Green's cooperation. They sent DPR photos of what looked like Green's lifeless, bloodied body. Believing his order had been carried out, Ross replied with chilling satisfaction and paid the money. He didn't know it, but that message would later read in court like the pronouncement of a mafia boss. Emboldened by what he thought was a successful hit, DPR even put out feelers to have another would-be blackmailer eliminated. The libertarian experiment in peaceful trade had morphed into a regime of violence and fear. The idealist was now fully acting as a kingpin willing to spill blood to protect his interests. Even law enforcement wasn't immune to Silk Road's temptations. In fact, 2 members of the task force secretly stole hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Silk Road's bitcoins for themselves, and even tried to extort DPR under false identities. Both agents were later caught and sent to prison for this staggering betrayal. At the time, their corruption remained unknown to their colleagues. What mattered to the rest of law enforcement was that they finally had enough evidence to nail Dread Pirate Roberts. By late September 2013, the investigators were confident Ross Ulbricht was their man. They had chat logs, payment records, and a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading to his doorstep. But arresting a cybercriminal who literally holds the keys to his kingdom is a delicate affair. If Ross sensed the raid coming, he could encrypt or destroy his laptop in seconds, wiping away evidence and maybe even locking investigators out of Silk Road forever. The task force needed to catch him in the act, logged in as DPR with his computer unlocked. They also knew Ross was careful, often accessing his admin site from public Wi-Fi to avoid tracing. After watching him for weeks, agents learned his routine. He often spent afternoons working on his laptop at a neighborhood library in San Francisco. October 1st, 2013. The trap is set. Agents quietly take up positions in the library. At a signal, 2 undercover operatives nearby begin a loud fake argument. Ross looks up, distracted, just for a second. That's the moment. In a flash, an agent lunges and snatches the open laptop before Ross can even blink. "Freeze! FBI!" Shouts ring out as others grab Ross. He's tackled to the floor, utterly stunned. The king of the dark web has been dragged into the light. But the laptop, it holds everything. Chat logs, Bitcoin wallets, names. And what they find next will bring the whole empire crashing down. Agents quickly whisk Ross out of the library, laptop clutched tightly as evidence. In that moment, the sprawling Silk Road marketplace effectively falls silent. Law enforcement had already seized the Icelandic server, and the site was replaced with a federal seizure notice. Around the world, users refreshed their Tor browsers to find Silk Road gone, vanished like a pirate ship into the mist. Many panicked, fearing they might be exposed next, but the authorities' net was focused on the leadership. The alleged Dread Pirate Roberts was in custody, and his empire was in ruins. For Ross, the aftermath was swift and crushing. The FBI soon discovered a trove of evidence on his laptop. Chat logs of DPR's conversations, encryption keys, the Bitcoin wallets holding Silk Road's profits, and even a diary where Ross had candidly documented his double life. The digital fingerprints were unmistakable. In a New York federal courtroom in early 2015, Ross Ulbricht faced trial as the mastermind of Silk Road. Prosecutors laid out the whole saga: the drugs, the crypto millions, the attempted hits, painting Ross as a new breed of drug lord. His defense tried to raise doubt, suggesting maybe Ross wasn't the only Dread Pirate Roberts, or that he'd been set up to take the fall. But after weeks of testimony, the verdict was decisive, guilty on all counts. Then came the sentence, and it was staggering. Despite Ross's young age and pleas from family and supporters, the judge decided to make an example of him. Ross Ulbricht received 2 life sentences plus 40 years, with no possibility of parole. Essentially, a death sentence in slow motion. In her sentencing remarks, the judge referenced the deadly consequences of drug trafficking and Ross's willingness to resort to violence. Ross stood trembling as the reality set in that he would likely spend the rest of his life in a prison cell. It was a haunting end for a man who once professed only peaceful ideals. The Silk Road saga was over, but its ripple effects had only just begun. Within a month of the original site's shutdown, opportunists launched Silk Road 2.0 on the dark web, hoping to recapture that lucrative market. It would itself be busted by authorities a year later. Other darknet markets sprouted like mushrooms after rain, each one a little less naive, a little more guarded, and sometimes even bigger than Silk Road. The cycle of cat and mouse between law enforcement and dark web drug lords continued unabated. Ross was gone. Silk Road was dead. But the code, the blueprint, the idea, it was already spreading. On January 21, 2025, Ross was pardoned by the 47th President of the United States. Social media and other sources shows him having a happy life with his family and friends. But Silk Road was just the beginning. Because after one empire fell, a new kind of marketplace took its place. It wasn't built on ideals. It was built on stolen lives. To see how criminals began buying and selling digital identities like products, watch our next episode on Genesis Market.